The wind howled like a mourning spirit across the frozen plains of rural Nebraska, a sound that chilled the very soul of anyone unfortunate enough to hear it. It was the coldest night of the decade, a brutal freeze where the air itself seemed to turn into shards of glass. In the heart of this white hell, a shadow dragged itself through the snow. It was Molly, a golden retriever whose once glorious coat was now matted with ice and dried blood. She was a walking skeleton, her ribs protruding like the jagged edges of a broken cage, shivering so violently that her bones rattled. Every step was a battle against a cruel, invisible villain, lethal hypothermia. Molly wasn't alone in this frozen wasteland, and that was the only reason her heart still beat. Clamped gently in her jaws, wrapped in a filthy, tattered rag, was her entire world, a tiny puppy named Hope. The baby was surprisingly warm, shielded by the last remnants of the mother's body heat. Molly's paws were raw, leaving a trail of crimson spots on the pristine white snow, a gruesome map of her suffering. She couldn't feel her back legs anymore. A deep, festering wound from an old hunter's trap throbbed with a dull, distant pain. She was dying, and she knew it. But she had a mission that transcended death. The lights of the sheriff's office flickered in the distance, a beacon of safety in a world of darkness. To Molly, that glowing window wasn't just a building. It was the gate to heaven for her baby. She paused, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps that turned to instant frost. Her instinct screamed at her to lie down and sleep forever, to let the snow cover her broken body. But the tiny whimper from the bundle in her mouth pushed her forward. She had to make it to the door. She had to deliver the package before her heart stopped. Inside the station, Sheriff Bill sat alone, nursing a cup of stale coffee that had long since gone cold. At 60 years old, with a face weathered by time and a heart scarred by the loss of his wife, Bill was a man of routine and quiet faith. He reached for his pocket Bible, his thumb brushing over the worn leather cover. The silence of the empty office was heavy, amplifying the loneliness that awaited him at his empty house. Outside, the blizzard raged, a monster trying to tear the roof off. Bill sighed, preparing to brave the storm, unaware that a tragedy was unfolding inches from his doorstep. Molly collapsed at the bottom of the wooden steps, her strength finally evaporating. She couldn't climb. She whined, a sound so weak the wind swallowed it whole. Desperation flooded her eyes. With a burst of adrenaline born of pure motherly love, she dragged herself up the stairs using only her front paws, her back legs useless dead weight. She reached the door. She didn't scratch to come in. She nudged the bundle against the wood. Then she let out a sharp, mournful bark, a sound that carried all the sorrow of a final goodbye. Bill froze. He knew the sounds of the night. But that wasn't the wind. It was a cry for help. He pulled his heavy coat tighter and threw open the heavy oak door. The gust of wind nearly knocked him back, blinding him with snow. He looked down, expecting to see debris. Instead, his flashlight beam landed on a small, shivering bundle wrapped in a rag. He crouched, his large hands trembling as he peeled back the cloth. A pair of terrified puppy eyes looked up at him. "Merciful God," Bill whispered, his heart skipping a beat. But the horror wasn't the abandoned puppy. It was what Bill saw when he lifted his gaze. 10 yards away, under the harsh glare of the street lamp, stood the mother. Molly swayed on her feet, looking back at him one last time. Her golden eyes were filled with an intelligence that pierced Bill's soul. She wasn't asking to come in. She was checking to make sure he had the baby. It was a look of pure, agonizing relief. "Wait!" Bill shouted, stepping out into the biting cold. "Come here, girl! Come!" Inside, Molly didn't move toward him. She knew her presence might make him reject the puppy, or perhaps she simply knew she was too far gone to be saved. With a grace that defied her condition, she turned her head away, breaking the connection. She took a step back into the darkness, then another. She was leading death away from her child. She was sacrificing the last minute of her life to ensure her baby wouldn't watch her die. It was a heartbreaking act of martyrdom that no human could do. Misunderstand. Bill stood paralyzed for a second, the puppy clutched to his chest. He saw the blood in the snow where she had stood. He saw the limp. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't abandoning the puppy, she was saving it. He looked down at the rag the puppy was wrapped in and noticed a piece of paper pinned to it, fluttering violently in the wind. He snatched it, squinting to read the scribbled handwriting of a previous owner who had clearly passed away. Protect him, for she gave everything she had for him. Tears, hot and instant, welled in the sheriff's eyes, freezing on his cheeks. The mother had vanished into the swirling wall of white. The storm was intensifying, the temperature dropping to levels that killed in minutes. Bill looked at the warmth of his office, then at the abyss of the blizzard. He knew the odds. He knew she was likely already curling up to die. But looking at the puppy's hopeful face, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. The clock was ticking, and every second the mother spent in that storm was a step closer to the end. The villain of the story, the brutal, unforgiving winter, was tightening its grip around her throat. Bill wasn't just a sheriff tonight. He was the only hope she had left. But the snow was covering her tracks faster than he could think. Was it already too late? Had the angel of death already claimed the mother who gave up everything? This poor mother sacrificed herself to save her baby in the freezing cold. If this touched your heart, please subscribe and pray for her rescue. Your prayers can work miracles tonight. Sheriff Bill didn't hesitate for a second, his instincts overriding the brutal cold that nipped at his exposed skin. He tucked the shivering puppy, Hope, deep inside his heavy shearling coat, right against the warmth of his chest. "Hold on, little one," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "We're going to get your mama back." He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and slammed the office door shut, plunging them into the howling chaos of the storm. The wind screamed like a banshee, threatening to knock the old lawman off his feet, but his resolve was as solid as the granite of the Rockies. He knew that every second wasted in this frozen hellscape was a death sentence for the brave mother who had just walked away. The patrol car roared to life, its engine complaining against the sub-zero temperatures. Bill flipped on the emergency lights, painting the swirling snow in frantic flashes of red and blue. He drove slowly, his eyes straining against the whiteout conditions to find the faint, disappearing trail of blood and paw prints. The tracks were already filling with fresh snow, fading like a ghost in the mist. Panic began to tighten his chest. If he lost her trail now, in this vast, frozen darkness, she would be nothing more than a bump in the snow by morning. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, praying for a sign, any sign. Of the golden coat amidst the endless white. Suddenly the tracks veered sharply off the road, heading toward the ruins of the old community church, a structure abandoned for years. The snow here was too deep for the cruiser. The tires spun helplessly, digging a grave in the ice. Bill cursed under his breath, slamming the vehicle into park. He couldn't drive any further. He would have to go on foot. He zipped his jacket higher to protect the puppy and stepped out into the waist-deep drift. The day cold hit him like a physical punch, stealing the breath from his lungs. His knees ached with every step, a painful reminder of his age, but he pushed forward, driven by a force greater than adrenaline. He trudged toward the church, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The silence here was heavy, disturbed only by the creaking of old wood. "Molly!" he shouted, his voice snatched away by the wind. There was no answer. He reached the dilapidated porch, peering into the shadows underneath. The rotting floorboards. It was a perfect place to die. Dark, hidden and sheltered from the wind, he swept the light back and forth, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he saw it. A mound of snow that looked unnatural. It wasn't just snow, it was the rhythmic rise and fall of a fading life. Molly was curled into a tight ball in the furthest corner of the crawlspace, almost invisible against the grey dirt and ice. She wasn't moving. Bill fell to his knees, ignoring the sharp rocks digging into his legs, and crawled into the tight, claustrophobic space. The smell of old earth and infection filled his nose. "Hey, girl," he cooed softly, trying to make his deep voice sound like a lullaby. "It's okay. I've got you." But as he reached out, Molly let out a low, guttural growl. It wasn't aggression. It was pure, unadulterated fear. Even in her final moments, she was terrified that this human had come to hurt her, not save her. She tried to scramble backward, her claws scraping uselessly against the frozen ground. But her body betrayed her. She was paralyzed by the cold, her back legs completely useless. It was a heartbreaking sight, a creature with such a noble spirit, now reduced to a trembling wreck, trying to hide from the very hand, trying to save her. Bill stopped moving, letting the silence hang between them. He needed her to trust him, but time was running out. Her breathing was shallow, a rattling sound that signaled the onset of pneumonia. "I'm not leaving you," Bill promised, tears stinging his eyes. "You fought for him, now let me fight for you." Bill realized he couldn't wait for her permission. The cold was winning. He unzipped his jacket just enough to reveal the puppy's head. "Look," he whispered, angling his body so she could see. "He's right here, he's safe." The effect was instantaneous. Molly's glazed eyes locked onto her baby. The growl died in her throat, replaced by a soft, yearning whimper. Her head dropped onto her paws, her body going limp. It was the moment of surrender. She wasn't giving up on life. She was giving herself over to him. She had nothing left to give, and she was finally letting someone else carry the burden. The sheriff moved quickly now. He reached in and grabbed her by the scruff and under the belly, pulling her 60-pound frame toward him. She was dead weight, heavy and awkward in the confined space. Bill grunted, straining every muscle in his back as he dragged her out into the open air. The wind lashed at them, but he didn't stop. He scooped her up into his arms, her frozen body pressed against the puppy in his jacket. It was a staggering load for an older man in deep snow, but the warmth of the reunion he was holding gave him supernatural strength. Every step back to the cruiser was a battle. The snow seemed to grab at his boots, trying to pull him down. Molly's head lolled against his shoulder, her tongue hanging out, pale and cold. "Stay with me, old girl," Bill panted, his lungs burning. "Don't you dare quit now." He could feel her heart beating against his chest, slow, erratic, and dangerously weak. He stumbled once, falling to one knee, but he refused to drop his precious cargo. He shielded them with his own body, taking the brunt of the fall before heaving himself back up. He was a man on a mission from God, and he would not fail. Finally, he reached the car. He wrenched the back door open and gently laid Molly on the seat. She didn't move. Panic flared in Bill's chest. He quickly cranked the heater to the maximum, creating a cocoon of warmth. He pulled the puppy from his jacket and placed Little Hope right under Molly's nose. "Wake her up, son," Bill whispered urgently. "Tell her we made it." The puppy, sensing his mother, began to lick her frozen face, whining with high-pitched urgency. It was a plea for life, a tiny voice calling back a soul from the brink of crossing over. For a terrifying moment, there was no response. The wind howled outside, mocking their efforts. Then a miracle. Molly's ear twitched. One eye cracked open, revealing a sliver of gold. She let out a deep sigh, her tail giving a single, almost imperceptible thump against the seat. She was alive. She smelled her baby, felt the warmth, and knew the nightmare of the cold was over. But as Bill jumped into the driver's seat and floored the gas, he knew the real battle was just beginning. She was safe from the storm, but the damage to her body was catastrophic. Is your heart racing for this family? Their fight isn't over yet. Your like helps us save more lives like Molly's. Subscribe to support our mission. Now, let's see if she survives the night. The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic was a blur of terrified prayers and the roar of the engine. Sheriff Bill drove like a man possessed, his knuckles white on the wheel, glancing every few seconds at the rearview mirror. Molly was sprawled across the back seat, ominously still. The heat from the vents was blasting, but she was still shivering with a violence that shook her entire frame. The cold had seeped deep into her marrow, a silent killer refusing to let go. Beside her, little Hope whined incessantly, pawing at his mother's snout, sensing that the soul of his protector was drifting away like smoke in the wind. When the cruiser screeched to a halt in front of the clinic, Bill didn't wait. He kicked the door open and scooped Molly up, her body feeling alarmingly light, as if life had already drained half her. "Wait!" He burst through the clinic doors, shouting for help. The night staff, accustomed to emergencies but shocked by the state of the animal in the sheriff's arms, sprang into action. "Trauma room 1, now!" The vet, Dr. Evans, commanded, her face setting into a mask of grim determination. They laid Molly onto the cold metal table, her golden fur matted with mud, blood, and ice, looking like a fallen angel in a sterile purgatory. The atmosphere in the room shifted from urgency to a terrifying, clinical quiet. The only sounds were the beep of the heart monitor and the snip of scissors as the medical team worked to cut away the frozen, filthy bandages. What they revealed underneath made even the hardened sheriff look away. Her back leg wasn't just injured, it was mangled, the flesh angry and swollen from the trap wound that had gone untreated for days. Infection had set in, pumping poison through her exhausted veins. The smell of decay filled the small room, a stark reminder of how close she was to the end. "Her temperature is critically low," Dr. Evans announced, her voice tight. "She's in severe shock. The hypothermia is shutting down her organs one by one." She looked at Bill with eyes that held no false promises. "Bill, I need to be honest. Her heart is incredibly weak. She's fighting sepsis and exposure. Most dogs wouldn't have made it this far." The words hung in the air like a sentence. The villain here wasn't a person. It was the cumulative weight of suffering that had finally crushed her resilience. They rushed to stabilize her, hooking her up to IV fluids that looked like liquid life flowing into her broken body. Warm blankets and heating pads were piled around her, trying to coax the warmth back into her frozen core. Bill stood in the corner, holding little Hope against his chest. The puppy had gone silent, watching the frantic activity with wide, fearful eyes. He seemed to know that his mother was fighting a battle he couldn't help her with. Bill stroked the puppy's head, whispering, "Watch her, son. Give her your strength." The hours that followed were an agonizing test of faith. The clinic fell silent as the night deepened, leaving only the rhythmic, uneven beeping of the monitor to mark the passage of time. Molly drifted in and out of consciousness, her eyes rolling back, her breathing shallow and ragged. Every dip in her heart rate sent a spike of adrenaline through the room. She was walking the tightrope between here and the hereafter, and the wind seemed to be blowing her toward the fall. It was the dark night of the soul, where medicine ends and destiny begins. Then the crisis hit. Just before 3 a.m., the heart monitor let out a long, piercing warning tone. Molly's heart was giving out. "She's crashing!" Dr. Evans shouted, grabbing a syringe. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Bill's heart stopped. He rushed to the table, ignoring protocol, and grabbed Molly's limp paw. It was cold. "No!" he commanded, his voice cracking. "You don't get to die now. Not after you saved him. You hear me, Molly? You fight!" The vet administered the adrenaline, performing chest compressions on the fragile ribcage. It was a brutal, violent dance to restart a life. The puppy, sensing the panic, let out a sharp, piercing bark from the chair where Bill had placed him. It cut through the noise of the machines. That sound, the voice of the child she had sacrificed everything for, seemed to reach Molly in the beam. Darkness where she was lost. Her ear twitched. A spark fired in the fading embers of her brain. The flat whine of the monitor stuttered, then beeped again. A rhythm. Weak, thready, but there. A collective breath was released in the room. Dr. Evans slumped against the counter, exhaling sharply. "She's back," she whispered, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I don't know how, but she's back." Molly's chest rose and fell with a slightly deeper rhythm. She had stared death in the face, and hearing her baby's call, had turned around and walked back to the living. For the rest of the night, Bill refused to leave her side. He pulled a chair right up to the metal crate where they had moved her for recovery. He held her paw through the bars, his thumb stroking the rough pads. He talked to her about the warm fireplace waiting for her, about the soft bed, about the steaks he would grill for her. He painted a picture of a future she had never dared to dream of. Molly slept, a deep, restorative coma, her body finally allowed to rest without the fear of freezing. As the first light of dawn began to bleed through the clinic blinds, a shift occurred. The grey pallor of death seemed to lift from her coat. Her breathing was no longer a struggle, it was a peaceful rhythm. The fever from the infection had broken, leaving her damp but cool. The antibiotics were winning the war against the poison in her blood. The sun rose, casting a golden beam that landed directly on her face, illuminating the gold in her fur. Slowly, groggily, Molly opened her eyes. The glaze of death was gone, replaced by a hazy confusion. She tried to lift her head, but she was too weak. She shifted her gaze and found Bill. Then she looked past him to the small carrier where Hope was sleeping. She let out a soft sigh, a sound of pure contentment. She didn't need to run anymore. She didn't need to fight the cold. She was warm. She was safe. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't in pain. Dr. Evans checked her vitals one last time, a smile finally breaking through her professional demeanor. "She's a miracle, Bill," she said softly. "The infection is receding. The leg will need surgery, and she'll have a limp, but she's going to keep it. She's going to live." The relief that washed over Bill was so intense, he almost collapsed. He looked at the dog who had become the center of his universe in just 12 hours. The real victory wasn't just the medical survival. It was the spark of life returning to her eyes. When Bill opened the crate door to check on her, Molly didn't flinch away. She didn't growl. Instead, she slowly stretched her neck out and rested her chin on his hand. It was a heavy, trusting weight. She was thanking him. In that sterile room, amidst the smell of antiseptic and fear, a bond was forged that was stronger than steel. The victim had become the survivor. But the journey wasn't over. Molly was alive, but she was a shadow of the dog she was meant to be. She was skeletal, scarred, and weak. The road to recovery would be long, but now she wasn't walking it alone. She had a name, she had a savior, and she had a reason to get better. The nightmare of the storm was behind her. The dawn of her new life had just begun. Are you crying tears of relief? Molly fought death and won, but now she needs to heal and learn to be a dog again. Stay tuned for the most emotional transformation you've ever seen. Fast forward 1 month, and the frozen wasteland of that nightmare night feels like a distant memory. The sun is shining over Nebraska, but the brightest light comes from Molly herself. The transformation is nothing short of a miracle, a true glow-up that defies medical explanation. The skeletal figure that arrived at the clinic is gone, replaced by a radiant creature. Her coat, once matted and dull, has grown back thick and lustrous, shimmering like spun gold in the sunlight. Her ribs are no longer visible, hidden beneath a healthy layer of muscle and fur gained from weeks of love and good nutrition. She doesn't just look like a dog, she looks like royalty, reclaiming her throne. The real turning point was the Day of Beauty, a ceremonial washing away of the past. Sheriff Bill, with sleeves rolled up and a gentle smile, lifted Molly into a warm bath. The water turned dark instantly, washing away the mud, the dried blood, and the scent of fear that had clung to her for so long. As Bill massaged the soothing shampoo into her fur, Molly didn't pull away. She closed her eyes and leaned into his touch, groaning with pleasure. It was the first time in her life she felt hands that were meant to heal, not hurt. When he dried her off with a fluffy towel, she looked in the mirror and seemed to stand a little taller. She was clean, she was dignified, she was loved. Her appetite returned with a vengeance, a delightful sign of her will to live. The first time Bill set a full bowl of premium kibble mixed with warm gravy in front of her, Molly hesitated, looking at him for permission. When he nodded, she ate with a gusto that warmed Bill's heart, her tail wagging rhythmically with every bite. She no longer had to scavenge or starve to ensure Hope ate first. There was enough for everyone. Watching her fill out, seeing the hollows of her face disappear to reveal a beautiful, broad smile, was the best payment the sheriff could have asked for. But the most beautiful change wasn't physical. It was the blossoming of her personality. The terrified animal that had crawled under a church to die was replaced by a goofy, affectionate shadow who followed Bill everywhere. She discovered the joy of toys, specifically a squeaky plush duck that she carried around the house like a trophy. She learned that the sound of the sheriff's truck in the driveway meant happiness, not danger. She would limp to the door, her back legs stiff but functional, a badge of honor from her war against the winter, and greet him with a happy bark that echoed through the once silent house. Little Hope, true to his name, grew into a ball of boundless energy. He was a chaotic whirlwind of fluff, chewing on Bill's slippers and chasing his own tail until he got dizzy. Molly watched him with the patience of a saint, occasionally nudging him with her nose when he got too rowdy. She was no longer his protector against death. She was his teacher in life. She taught him how to sit for treats and how to ask for belly rubs. The bond between mother and son remained unbreakable, but now it was forged in joy rather than survival. The sheriff's home, once a mausoleum of memories and silence, was now alive with the sound of clicking paws and happy sighs. Bill wasn't just a savior, he was the saved. The loneliness that had plagued him since his wife's passing evaporated. He found himself laughing out loud as Hope tripped over his own feet, and feeling a deep, quiet peace as Molly rested her head on his knee while he watched TV. They had filled the empty spaces in his heart with a love so pure it felt divine. He realized that God hadn't just sent him on a mission to save a dog. He had sent the dog to save the man. On a peaceful Sunday morning, the scene on the sheriff's porch is the definition of a happy ending. Bill sits in his rocking chair, a Bible open on his lap and a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. The snow has melted, revealing green grass where Hope is currently wrestling with a tennis ball. Molly lies at Bill's feet, soaking up the sun, her golden coat blazing against the dark wood of the porch. She looks up at Bill, her eyes filled with an adoration that transcends words. She knows she is home. She knows she is his, and he is hers. As for the abstract villain, the cruel fate or the person who abandoned them, they have been defeated by the ultimate revenge, happiness. While the person who dumped them lives with the rot of their cruelty, Molly and Hope are living like kings. Bill often thinks about that. Person, not with anger anymore, but with pity. They threw away a treasure. They missed out on the most loyal friend a human could ever have. The universe has a way of balancing the scales. Molly's suffering was paid back in tenfold with love. The adoption papers didn't need to be signed. The pact was sealed the moment Bill picked her up in the snow. They are a family now, a pack of 3 survivors who found each other in the storm. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the yard, Bill reaches down and scratches Molly behind the ears. She closes her eyes, letting out a long, contented sigh. The nightmare is over. The cold is gone. And in this house, there is only warmth, full bellies, and a love that will last forever. Who abandoned this angel deserves forgiveness or punishment? Tell us in the comments. Leave a like if you believe every animal deserves a home. Comment Amen to bless their new life.